I used to think the person who would betray me would be an outsider, a coworker, an ex. Not the people who once held my hand through the earliest storms of life. But life sometimes has a bitter way of teaching, especially when money and power are on the table. My name is Alexis. I'm 38 years old, and this is the story of how I had to stand up and protect the inheritance my grandmother left me and my grandson Liesel left me from my own parents. It all started on a Tuesday afternoon. I was on the 24th floor of Vista Tower in Seattle, wrapping up a meeting with a major client at the investment firm where I work. My phone buzzed. A brief message from my mother. She was never one for small talk. Saturday afternoon, 3 p.m., come home. Important matter. No explanation, no context, not a hint of emotion. I stood still for a moment, phone in hand, city lights reflecting off the glass. In my family, important matter had always been code for, Mason's done something again, and Alexis needs to fix it. Mason is my younger brother, 3 years my junior, and in our parents' eyes, he could do no wrong. He once shattered Dad's windshield, and I was scolded for not watching your brother. He dropped out midway through his sophomore year in college due to mental pressure, and my mom immediately called me home to talk him through it. He was once sued for racking up over $80,000, 0 cents in credit card debt, and my dad quietly took out a loan against his car to pay it off. And me? I earned a full scholarship to college, worked while completing my MBA, and bought my first condo by age 30. No one said congratulations, only, that's expected. You've always been better than Mason. The only person who truly believed in me and acknowledged my worth was my grandmother, Evelyn. A quiet woman with sharp insight. She had run a small craft store for 20 years after my grandfather passed away. As a child, I thought of her as a small lantern glowing steadily in a household that always favored Mason. She was the first to teach me how to track expenses, read a bank statement and say, money isn't the goal, it's the tool that lets you choose your life. 2 years ago, Evelyn passed away from a stroke. The entire family was shaken. Not just by the loss, but by the revelation that she had accumulated more than anyone expected. A charming wooden house by Lake Winthrop, a diversified investment portfolio worth over $1,200,000, 0 cents, and a collection of vintage jewelry appraised at more than $200,000, 0 cents. And most significantly, her will, executed by a private attorney, clearly stated that the majority of her assets would go to me. Not because I was the most loved, but because she believed I was the only one capable of preserving it with integrity. My parents tried to act composed at first, but the look in their eyes when they heard the terms, "I haven't forgotten." A year and a half passed and I remained faithful to her wishes. I used the investment returns to restore the lake house according to conservation standards, preserving every photo and handwritten letter of hers. But as the final transfer date neared, the pressure increased. Vague questions from my mother. Surely your grandmother didn't want the family divided, right? Ambiguous calls from my father. Mason's having a rough time, can you help a little? And then that brief message, a family meeting, urgent. I knew. No need to ask. I knew they were planning something. And this time, they weren't going to let me walk away so easily. I knew I would never be the child my parents put first. But Evelyn? She didn't need to say much, didn't need to hug me every night or praise me. One look from her was enough for me to feel seen. I remember clearly the afternoon I turned 12. Rain poured like a waterfall after school, and I had forgotten my raincoat. My mom texted, "Get home yourself, you're old enough." I stood outside the school gate for nearly an hour, shivering. Then, a cream-colored Volvo pulled up. Evelyn rolled down the window, said nothing, and handed me a warm, dry wool scarf. I climbed in, soaked and trembling. She looked at me for a long time, then said one sentence. "Don't let anyone make you feel you're not worthy of being cared for." From that moment I knew. She was the only one in the family who truly stood by me. While other kids were taken to amusement parks or movie theaters by their parents, I went with her to investment meetings and community finance classes. At first I found it boring. But when she taught me how to read a company's cash flow, I became fascinated. I've never told anyone this, but the first time I understood a balance sheet, I felt like I had control over my own life. For the very first time. Evelyn wasn't just family, she was my compass. She helped me open my first investment account with tutoring money I'd saved. When I entered college, she didn't send me gifts, she sent me a budgeting spreadsheet. True freedom begins when you understand every dollar you have, she said. My parents, they scoffed. You don't need to complicate things like Grandma did, my mother said. Just marry rich and you'll be fine. So when Evelyn passed quietly at age 84, I didn't just lose a relative. I lost the only place where I had ever felt truly recognized. A week after the funeral, her lawyer, Mr. Kenmore, called me to his office, a stately place with oak-paneled walls and the scent of aged paper. He didn't mince words. Mrs. Evelyn left the majority of her estate to you, he said gravely, because she believed you're the only one who understands that inheritance isn't just about money, it's about responsibility. I was stunned. According to the will, I had full rights to the Winthrop Lake House, the $1,200,000 0 cents portfolio, and the entire family jewelry collection, including the sapphire ring she had once told me she would pass on when the time is right. My parents received a few specific bequests: a modest sum in cash, some memorabilia, and an education fund for Mason, restricted to startup or academic use and subject to trustee approval. Their reaction to the reading of the will was as if someone had poured acid on their pride. My mother didn't speak, just clenched her fists until her knuckles turned white. My father stood, turned to me and hissed, "Are you really going to divide the family over some money, Alexis?" I didn't reply, not because I had nothing to say, but because words would never be enough for people who had never tried to understand me in 38 years. And Mason? He smirked, the kind of smug grin worn by someone who believes he'll get his share anyway. He looked at me and said coldly, "You don't actually think you'll get to keep it all, do you?" I didn't flinch, but in that moment I knew the battle hadn't started yet, and they, my own family, would be the first to draw blood. I no longer had time to be angry. They were making moves. And if I didn't act now, everything Evelyn had protected for nearly a century would be reduced to ashes by the very people who bore her name. The next morning, I walked into Nina's office. She was waiting with a stack of printed documents, her eyes sharp as razors. "Listen, Alexis," she said, cutting straight to the point. "We're not just protecting money. We're stopping an organized attack from your own parents." I nodded. "Let's set up an irrevocable trust, immediately." Nina didn't flinch. "Already drafted. You'll be the grantor and sole beneficiary. Once we move, they won't be able to touch a cent." We split the work immediately. Nina finalized the trust paperwork. I coordinated with Kenmore to begin the transfer of assets, investment accounts, property title for the Winthrop house, and the vintage jewelry still held in the bank. No room for error, no margin for delay. That afternoon, I went to the bank where the family's safe deposit box was kept. The manager still remembered me, Evelyn's only granddaughter who actually cared. When the thick steel doors swung open, I stepped into a cold, silent room. Inside was the box Evelyn once called the heart of the family. I opened the lid. Familiar items lay inside: the sapphire necklace she wore on her wedding day, the emerald brooch passed down from my great-great-grandmother, and a leather-bound ledger with worn corners. I stared at each item, silently vowing no one has the right to erase these memories out of greed. That night, in Nina's office, I signed the trust documents. Each stroke of the pen felt like slicing into the past, but it was a cut necessary to protect the future. "Don't answer any calls from them," Nina warned. "They're suspicious now, and when they realize they've lost control, they'll strike." I said nothing, but inside the alarm bells were already screaming. And sure enough, Friday morning a text from my mother appeared. "What did you do to Grandma's account? Dennis says there are unusual movements. Call me. Do not stay silent." I didn't reply. An hour later, my father called. Then Mason. None of them left a message, just repeated calls, like a rainstorm pounding against the door I had locked long ago. That afternoon, Kenmore called me. It's done. The assets are officially in the trust. They no longer have any legal access. I exhaled, for the first time in weeks. But the relief lasted only 10 hours. That evening, an email arrived from the law office of Angela Park, the same person who had drafted the unauthorized trust for my parents. Dear Ms. Alexis Monroe, we represent Mr. and Mrs. Gerald and Linda Monroe. In reviewing the terms of the late Mrs. Evelyn Monroe's will, our clients have reason to believe that the testator may have shown signs of diminished capacity during her final months. I scoffed. This was the infamous Plan B they had mentioned. I immediately forwarded the email to Nina. She called back 5 minutes later, barely hiding her frustration. So, it's war, but they've picked the wrong opponent. I stared out the window. The Seattle night was still and suffocating. Tomorrow, I would sit across from them at the so-called family meeting they had orchestrated to manipulate me. Only this time, I wasn't going there to listen to instructions. I was going to end the performance they had so carefully staged. I arrived at my parents' house at exactly 3 p.m. on Saturday, just as they had asked. A light drizzle fell. The sky was a dull gray, as if foretelling what was to come. I carried a document bag, compact, sealed, and heavy with truths they weren't ready to face. The door opened before I could even knock. My mother stood there, with a half-smile and a voice as sweet as artificial sugar. Alexis, you finally made it. Everyone's waiting in the living room. I stepped into the familiar house, each footstep like cutting through layers of dust from all the silences and compromises I had swallowed for years. The air was thick. My father sat in his usual armchair, face cold as steel. Mason stood near the window, hands in his pockets, not even looking at me. Sit down, my father said, his voice devoid of warmth. We need to talk, seriously. I sat and placed the document bag on the floor. This family is facing a difficult situation, he continued. Mason is going through an unfortunate period. We need to come together. Unfortunate period, I repeated, my eyes locked on his. You mean over $300,000, 0 cents in debt, to unidentified lenders? Mason spun around. You didn't have to spell it out like that. Oh, I think I did, I replied. You want me to fork over nearly $500,000 to clean up the mess of someone who's never taken responsibility for his life. The least I can do is name the problem accurately. My mother cut in, voice soft but firm. Alexis, this is about family. No one's asking you to carry everything. We just need you to cooperate. Sign this. She pulled out a thin folder and slid it across the table. I didn't touch it. This is a temporary asset transfer agreement into the family trust, isn't it? I asked, calm but cold as ice. My father nodded, just until things stabilized. I leaned down, opened my bag, and pulled out a copy of the irrevocable trust Nina and I had finalized 3 days earlier. I placed it in the center of the table, like the final move in a chess game. No need. All the assets have already been transferred to an irrevocable trust under my legal control, with full confirmation from both the attorney and the Washington State Notary Office. Silence. Silence without even breath. What? Mason shot up. You? When did you do that? Right after I found out you were trying to sell the house, forge signatures, and prepare to drag Evelyn's name through court by claiming diminished capacity. Don't ask why I didn't warn you. This family taught me that trust is a luxury. My mother trembled. You? You hid this from us? Did everything behind our backs? And what about you? I snapped. Hiring a private lawyer to rewrite the estate structure? Printing out a plan to emotionally manipulate me using Mason? I learned all of this from you. My father pushed himself up, voice rising. You're destroying this family over some inheritance? No, I am stopping a cycle of abuse that's lasted 30 years. Mason clenched his fists. You think a few documents mean you've won? I looked at my brother. neither angry nor pitying. This isn't a contest. This is a boundary. And for the first time in my life, I won't let anyone cross it. The tension in the room was suffocating. My mother wept. Whether it was real or another performance, I couldn't tell. I stood up, voice as steady as stone. If this family wants to survive, it has to start with honesty and accountability. I'm not abandoning anyone, but I'm also done setting myself on fire to keep people warm who don't know how to respect the flame. Then I walked out of that house. For the first time, I didn't look back. I thought the battle would settle down after that meeting, but the truth didn't wait for me to catch my breath. 3 days later, I received a phone call from a name I thought had vanished from my life nearly 2 decades ago. Uncle Robert. My father's youngest brother. The one who had been erased from every family gathering without anyone daring to ask why. Alexis, it's me, Robert Monroe. I know. It's been a long time. I was confused. I thought you moved to Colorado when I started college. Yes. And after that I was cut off, exactly as your father planned. His voice was hoarse, cold, but controlled. I'm calling because there's something you need to know. About the inheritance. And about Mason's past. We met at a small cafe north of Seattle. The rain was still falling. As if the sky knew I was about to hear something hard to swallow. I barely recognized him. His hair had gone gray, and the once gentle face was now etched with bitterness. Evelyn once told me you were the only one strong enough to untangle this family's knots, he began. And now, I think she was right. I clutched the hot coffee cup in my hands. What really happened to you, Uncle Robert? He placed a folder on the table. Your father was always jealous of anyone Grandma trusted, especially if it wasn't him. Back then, Evelyn chose me to run the family store because I had an accounting degree and a clear expansion plan. But then, your father and mother convinced her to temporarily transfer management to test Gerald's capabilities. I gasped. Grandma told me about that, but she said you suddenly left after a few months. No, I was forced to resign through a series of false financial accusations fabricated by your father. Evelyn never found solid proof, but the damage was done. I was pushed out of the family, right when Mason started gambling. I was stunned. Mason? Started when he was still a teenager? He nodded. He used his first tuition check to play at a small casino near Oregon. When he got caught, instead of facing it, your parents sold an inherited plot of land to quietly handle the issue. And it kept happening. For years. It got more dangerous each time. And they kept that from Evelyn? Not entirely, he said slowly. She started to get suspicious when she noticed the savings account being withdrawn from constantly. But whenever she asked, your parents blamed it on necessary investments or claimed Mason was having a mental health crisis. When she began seriously questioning things, they cut off all contact between her and me. I closed my eyes, memories crashing down like a waterfall. All the times Evelyn sighed while staring at the lake, the half-spoken sentences, the letters that never reached me. And you knew this all along? I asked, my voice sharp as a blade. I knew part of it, he admitted. But Evelyn asked me to monitor things from a distance, to keep records, just in case she couldn't protect the estate herself. What you've done recently is exactly why she chose you. I looked at the folder. Gambling receipts, debt contracts with shady lenders, letters between my father and a loan shark company in Chicago, recorded phone calls where my parents begged for more time to repay the debts. Because our son is about to inherit millions. Each document was a slap in the face, not just for the betrayal, but for the web of lies sustained across 2 generations. I thought Mason was the victim, I whispered, but no, he was coddled into becoming a danger. He placed a hand on my shoulder. You weren't wrong to protect what Evelyn left behind. And now, you're not wrong to protect yourself. I nodded, my eyes burning with fire. I won't let them use family ties as a weapon, ever again. And I knew, next time, I would be the one in control. I didn't go back to my parents' house right away. Instead, I sent a short message. I will host a meeting at my apartment. This is not for negotiation, but to announce the only terms under which I'm willing to help. Be there at 3 p.m. Saturday. Anyone absent forfeits all support. No sarcasm, no sugarcoating. I was done with masks. The living room in my penthouse apartment looked different that day. No flowers, no wine. Just a round table, white lighting, gray velvet chairs, and a folder of documents at each seat. My mother arrived first, eyes still red. I didn't know whether from emotion or fear of losing everything. My father came next, his face no longer carrying the pride he once wore like armor. Mason was last, his gaze evasive, his posture uneasy, but something about him had changed. No longer the man who believed he'd always be rescued no matter the cost. I stood up, my voice calm but sharp as steel. I'll be direct. I know everything about the loans, the calls, about the so-called temporary creditors. I also know you attempted to manipulate the will, fabricate claims about Evelyn's mental state, and tried to gain unauthorized access to my account. No one said a word in denial. I continued. And I also know what I'm about to say is the last chance, not for me, but for this family. I opened the folder. 3 conditions, no compromises. I looked straight at Mason. Home. Mason will admit himself into a gambling addiction treatment center for no less than 60 days. Not some casual feel-good therapy. A full-time, supervised program. I'll cover the cost. Personally, with no connection to the trust. Mason stiffened. And if I refuse? Then from this moment on, you're no longer my concern. My mother took a deep breath but didn't protest. My father clenched the armrest. I knew they understood this wasn't a threat. It was a declaration. 2. My parents will transfer all financial documents to Nina and Kenmore so they can begin the recovery plan. Clearing debts, selling off non-essential assets, and creating a new financial strategy. I'll assist with part of the fixed costs, again from personal funds. You're turning us into supervised subjects? My father growled. No, I replied coldly. You did that to me for 38 years. I'm just making sure I'm no longer the scapegoat for chaos. 3. From today on, any attempt to interfere with, access, or sidestep the trust left by Evelyn will be considered legal assault, and I, with full evidence, will pursue it to the end. No leniency. The room fell silent like a tomb. Mason lowered his head. I'll go. I've known I needed to for a long time. I just was never ready. Now's the time, I said, a bit softer. Ready or not, you have no choice left. My mother nodded, her voice raspy. We'll comply. My father looked up. For the first time in my life, his eyes held no anger, only exhaustion. Alexis, if I said, I'm sorry, would it be too late? I stared at him for a long moment. Too late to change the past, I replied. But it's never too late to fix the future, if you truly mean it. They left nearly an hour later, taking the files with them and expressions no longer clouded by denial. I stayed behind, watching the lights of Seattle from my wide glass windows. For the first time, I didn't feel trapped between duty and hurt. I felt something very different: control, clarity, and freedom. 6 months later, I returned to the cabin by Lake Winthrop. For the first time since Evelyn passed, this place wasn't the end of grief, but the beginning of a new rhythm of life. Autumn always came earlier here than in Seattle. The maple leaves were already deep red, reflected in the mirror-like lake. I stood on the porch, cup of hot cocoa in hand, eyes fixed on the forest. My chest still tightened at times, but it was no longer crushing. The restoration project was finally completed last week. I didn't change the architecture, just repaired the roof, reinforced the foundation, upgraded the wiring and plumbing, and preserved every beam, every window frame, exactly as I'd promised her. Every room still held the soul of the old house, just with more light and a touch of quiet modernity. Not too new, not too old. Just enough to move forward. My phone buzzed, a text from Nina. Ready to open the doors, or still hiding out by the lake? I laughed and typed back, "Give me one more week, things are still settling down." Truthfully, I'd been thinking about inviting a few close people for the weekend. Veronica, a former coworker. Dylan, the neighbor who lived next to me for 5 years and always said, "It's all right," when I dropped my keys. And maybe Mason, if he was willing. He completed his treatment program last month, moved into a sober living house near Bellevue, works at a small plant nursery, not a high-paying job, but stable. I haven't hovered, just stayed in touch enough so he knows he hasn't been cut off. Last week I got a short text from him. Today marks 90 days, still haven't lost, not even once, not to myself. That was all, but it made me cry. We don't hug, we don't say sappy things, but there's a quiet understanding between two people who were both witnesses and victims of the same kind of warped family love. As for my parents, they sold the old house 2 months ago, moved into a smaller condo near a shopping center. More convenient, less costly. My father, the man who once refused anyone's advice, is now listening to a young financial advisor Nina recommended. My mother's started keeping expense logs. For the first time in her life, she doesn't spend first, figure it out later. We still have half-spoken conversations. There's still silence between dinner courses, but I no longer expect them to change completely. I just hope they try to be more honest, more real, and it seems like they're trying. One evening, my mom called, not to ask for money, not to check if she could borrow a little from the trust, just to say, "I made the beef stew Evelyn used to cook. I miss her. And I know now." I never truly understood how lonely you were. I didn't know what to say, so I told the truth. I'm learning how to forgive without forgetting. That afternoon, I walked to the backyard, where Evelyn used to grow lavender and basil. Beneath a small stone statue was a tin box where I kept all her handwritten letters and black and white photos of us together. I opened the box. A small note slipped out. I'd never seen it before. Her handwriting, so familiar it made my heart ache. Read. "If you're reading this, it means you kept your promise. Thank you for not choosing the easier path. People say the most valuable assets are what you can measure, but to me, the greatest inheritance I left behind is the courage you've learned to hold." I folded the letter. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Because for the first time, I didn't feel loss. I felt whole. Alexa's story is a powerful reminder that not everyone called family deserves unconditional sacrifice. In a world where kinship is sometimes twisted into control, setting boundaries isn't betrayal, it's courage. Like Alexis, we all have the right to say enough, and to live unbound by guilt or false duty. What do you think of Alexis's choices? Would you be brave enough to draw your own line like she did? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful, real-life stories of family and rebirth.